We already learned a lot about the React basics over the last lectures. Our application still can use some extra styling, I'd say though. For example, these person components would be nice if they would look like cards and therefore be more like closed objects. Right now we can't really see the differences, or we can't really see the borders between this component and the other components. So styling components is obviously something super important. And right now there are two ways of styling we can implement. I will show you both. First of all, let's add a person.css file to our person component. And I gave this file the same name as the JavaScript file, just with a different extension. Of course, theoretically, that file name is up to you. Now, one important thing, whichever CSS code I write in here is not scoped to this person.js component. It is global CSS code. So I will define a new CSS class which I name person with a capital P. Still, I could add this anywhere in my application since it is global, but by using my component name, I can rule out the danger of accidentally using it somewhere else. So I will simply assign it to my div here. Class name, keep in mind, not class, class name, is person, a string person. Now down there in the CSS file, I can now change the styling. Maybe give it a width of 60% and a margin of auto to center it. Maybe also give it a border of 1 pixel solid EEE, a light gray, and a box shadow of 0, 2 pixels, 3 pixels, and a slightly darker gray. And let's give it a padding of 16 pixels maybe. Finally, let's set text align to center all the text. If I now save this CSS file and save the person.js file where I assign it as a class, nothing happens. Do you know why? Well, because we created our CSS class here in the CSS file, but by default, and this is maybe something you didn't know because it's not necessarily intuitive, but by default, no file is included into your project, into the code which gets created by the build workflow. You always have to import files to add them to the game. So we import the person component in our app.js file, and we also import the app.css file here. Now it might look strange to import a CSS file into a JavaScript file like this. But thanks to Webpack, which is the build tool which is in the end used by this React scripts package we're using implicitly here, thanks to Webpack we can actually import CSS into JavaScript, though it will not really merge the two files or anything like that. It is just made aware of that CSS file and will handle that differently. We'll basically import it into our HTML file. So in person.js, I will also add an import to /person CSS. And here you need the file extension. You can only omit it for JavaScript files. Now with that, you added this, you made Webpack aware of it. It will now add it to your HTML file. And hence, if you now go back, you see we have this extra styling on our components. You can also see that if you inspect your code, we have the person class here. And if you scroll all the way up to the head section here in the developer tools, you see that there we actually have these style tags, which you can't find in the HTML file in the public folder. There we got no style tags in the head section, just some links to the manifest and so on, so not even to CSS files. The reason for this is that these style tags are injected dynamically by Webpack. This is the part I meant with it manages the imports you add. And this last style tag here should actually hold your person class. And there you can also clearly see it's a normal global CSS class. You also see that automatic prefixing though, which is very convenient because it makes sure that we don't have to do that. We can write the shortest CSS code possible or needed, and it will automatically prefix it to work in as many browsers as possible. So this is the style we set up. let's maybe fine-tune it a bit more by adding a top and bottom margin here. So let's maybe set this to 16 pixels so that we have some separation between our cards. Looks much better. Now we got the persons here. Now let's also style that button, and let's style it differently, because I mentioned that there are two ways of styling we know right now at least. In the last lecture I mentioned that we have different ways of styling the application. Let's style this button differently. In the app.js file, which is where we have that button, I want to style this button with something which is called inline styles. There's nothing wrong with using CSS files and classes, and this might even be the preferred way. But what you also often see in React apps is that you actually design your styles in JavaScript. How does this work? Let's go into that render function and create a new constant which I'll name style. The name is up to you. This is a JavaScript object, and as you might be aware, the CSS style properties have JavaScript representations. For example, background color, camel case instead of a dash, because background color like this would be an invalid JavaScript property name. You could wrap it in quotation marks to use it though. I'll use the camel case representation though. And then I assign a value, which is a string, which can be a color. For example, white. We can also set the font to inherit to use our surrounding font. We can also set a border, not border color, just a border of 1 pixel, solid, and then maybe blue. And we could also add some padding, maybe 8 pixels. Make sure to wrap all these values in quotation marks because we are writing JavaScript here. This have to be strings. Now I can go to the button, put on click into a new line to make this a bit easier to read, and add a style property. This is actually the normal style attribute made available by JSX. And style, as you can already see, should receive a dynamic value here. I'll simply pass style here, referring to this style constant, which is defined in the render method, of which this return expression here is part. So I can't just use style like this. It's not a class property, it's a normal variable, or actually, since we never change it, constant of this render method. Let's see if this has any effect. If we save this, we indeed see the button looks different now. We can improve this a bit more by first of all fixing this error and have 1 pixel of a border so that this style gets applied to, and setting the cursor to pointer so that we get this pointer cursor when hovering over it. If I now save this, we see that blue border and we see that cursor again. Now it doesn't change upon hovering, and actually styling that hover effect is pretty hard when using inline styles. This is one restriction already, but I got a whole module in this course where I show you some clever solutions to styling React components, which really can be something you can put a lot of thought into it. Always be aware, you can use a CSS file though. Then the styles defined here are global. So if we change button here, all the buttons in our whole app will be changed. So this might not be what you want. But on the other hand, you can use the normal CSS syntax. Or you use inline styles as you do here. Then the styling is scoped to the component or to the element you actually added to. But you have some restrictions of not being able to leverage the full power of CSS. As I mentioned, I'll have a full module about this because there is a golden way in the middle where you can scope styles and still use all the CSS features. More about this later. For now, be aware that we got these two different ways of styling at the moment. Use inline styles as we do here whenever you want to scope the style and make sure it only applies to this single element and to none other element in your app or even in the same component.